The book of Judges. The book of Judges has many interesting and thoughtful stories. The book focuses on this redemption cycle of the nation of Israel, and as they were going through this, basically there was this, they would go from God to these idols and back to God. Whenever they would go to the idols for worship and dedication and loyalty to those, an opposing nation would oppress them, enslave them. Then, when they would call on God, God would, time after time again, redeem them by calling on a certain man or a certain woman to deliver them. These people that God would raise up were called judges. Now, that term judge is not exactly the type of judge that we have today. A judge in the Hebrew was called a shofet. S-H-O-F-E-T, shofet. And a shofet was basically like this clan chieftain. Okay? They were usually military leaders who served as head of the tribe. They were often the central and important decision maker for the tribe. But they just lacked the organizational structure of power like you see in a monarchy of a king or queen. Now, in the book of Judges, there are 12 judges. And I don't think that that was any coincidence. Because in Hebrew, numbers have language and meaning to them. And the number 12 represents perfect order and divine completion. You have 12 tribes of Israel. You have the 12 disciples. You have 12 gates of Jerusalem. The list goes on and on. To the Jew, numbers speak loudly and are a declaration of something more than just a literal number or quantity of something. One of the judges that I want to talk about this morning is one that you've probably heard about before. Maybe even exhaustively have heard about this judge. And if you haven't guessed who it is already by the first slide, it is Samson. Samson, as we know, as far as we have written record, is the last known judge of Israel. And just to be clear, when Samson dies, we don't have any other written record of any judge rising up after him. Not saying there were not, but as far as the book goes, this is it. Now for today's lesson, I'll sort of be in like a storytelling, paraphrasing mode. Okay? You can follow along with me in Judges chapter 13 through 15. Now the entirety of this chapter goes all the way to chapter 16, but for our lesson, we're going to kind of stop around 15. Now I do want to ask this question, and I want you to remember this question as we go throughout our lesson this morning. That question is, do forgiveness and retribution go together? I told Lovey this morning that I may open up a can of worms, and I should have put a disclaimer before I started. But it's too late. Do forgiveness and retribution go together? Answer that for yourself, yes or no. Or maybe your answer is sometimes, depending on the context. The story of Samson can be a very complicated one. And anyone that has read the entirety of the story knows it's a pretty complicated story. Samson was a complicated guy, to say the least. We famously know him as the big, strong man out of all the judges. So strong that he could tear gates off of city walls. I don't know of anyone with the strength of that in our world today. Samson had what we would call a supernatural strength about him. And if we open up in any other part of the scripture in the story of Samson, we can kind of get a little confused as to what's going on and the events taking place. Now, I want you to keep in mind as we first begin the story that God had specific rules that his people were to follow. There were certain things that were forbidden for the Hebrew people, the nation of Israel, to engage in. One of those things was to intermarry into another nation. to take a man or a woman from another neighboring nation outside of Israel. Whether it be the Moabites, the Ammonites, or the Philistines in this case. It was all off limits. And God had a specific purpose for this. There was reason. And that was because these other nations were pagan, meaning that they worshiped multiple gods that were not the one true God of Israel. And the Philistines had many. And what that would do is, obviously, if you married into that type of culture, that culture could kind of seep into your culture. And then there would be this cultural confusion and mix-up. When we first get introduced to Samson, he is attracted to a Philistine woman. And he wants to marry her. Now this causes tension among the people of God, as it should have. Because he was breaking a rule. But despite that, he wanted to marry her anyway. And basically the story starts out that they had this wedding feast. And these wedding feasts would last for days. It wasn't just a 1 or 2 day rehearsal and ceremony and then it's done. And the Philistines in particular chose for Samson 30 men that they called companions. They were the groomsmen of Samson's day. And as far as we know, Samson didn't pick them. It's almost like they were pushed upon him. So he probably didn't have a really close personal relationship with any of these men. And I don't think he did, as we'll see in a moment. But during the wedding feast, Samson, being a man, wants to pose a challenge to the other men. I don't know exactly what his reason for this was. Probably to show his dominance over the other 30 men that were chosen to be his patron companions. I don't know. But he gives them a riddle. A riddle that was very personal to a certain event that had just transpired in his life involving his fight with a lion. And in that story, the companions can't figure it out. They weren't meant to figure it out. Actually, had they not cheated to get the answer, they would have never figured it out. It was that complicated of a riddle. And so when the men threaten his wife, Samson's wife, for the answer. So she begs and pleads Samson, please tell me the answer of the riddle. Samson says, not even my mother and father know it. Why should I tell you? That probably didn't make her feel better. But eventually, her pleading and her begging gets the best of Samson. And so he finally tells her the answer. So on the next day of the feast, coincidentally, the 30 men come to Samson and they say, hey, we got your riddle figured out. And when they gave him the answer, the scripture tells us that he was mad. Because he knew that they had cheated to get the answer. And part of the deal was really interesting. I think you already see it there. But basically, in total, the men were to give Samson 30 sheets of fabric and then 30 sets of clothing or garments. And vice versa if Samson lost the riddle or if they guessed it. So even though they cheated to get the answer, he was so angry of what they had done that he goes into this city of Ashkelon, which was a Philistine city. And the Bible tells us that he struck down 30 men. Random 30 men. Just took them out and stripped them of their clothes. And then he brought the clothes to the men, and I can almost see him now throwing the clothes at their feet and saying, here you go, cheaters. In response, somewhere down, even though everything seemed to have been done, at that point, everything could have just been finished. But it's not. What started as a riddle turns into something even greater. One night he goes to visit his wife, and he brings her a gift, a young goat. And his father-in-law meets him at the door of the home. And he has shocking news for Samson. When Samson arrives, he says, "Let me in the door to see my wife." And the father-in-law tells him, "I'm sorry, but I thought you hated her, so I gave her away in marriage to someone else." Now, we don't know why he said that. I don't know if it was just because he went down and beat up 30 random guys in Ashkelon. I don't know if that would have told the father-in-law he hated his wife. But whatever had happened, the father-in-law gave his daughter, Samson's wife, away to someone else. This made Samson so angry and so furious that he couldn't put the fire out. He goes out and he captures 300 foxes. And he ties their tails together in pairs, and in the knots of their tails, he puts a flaming torch. Now, I told you that numbers mean something. 12, we talked about that. 100 also has meaning. 100 in Hebrew language means a rounded amount, the totality of something. And that could be either in good context or evil, depending on what you're reading. But capturing 300 foxes? Can any of you do that? Somehow he does it. And when he strikes the torches on fire, this would have sent the foxes fleeing in all sorts of directions, but in pairs. And these foxes went through the grain fields, the olive fields, and the vineyards of the Philistines, burning up their food. And that was a big deal back then. Since grain, especially grain, was like the oil of our day, the lack of grain being produced into a food source meant starvation and death for some. So this was actually a pretty big deal. This wasn't just the destruction of property to the Philistines. This was something far greater. So in response to now remember, he does this because of what his father-in-law did to him. You gave my wife in marriage to another man. It's interesting that he doesn't take it out on his father-in-law. He takes it out on the nation of the Philistines. And so the Philistines get angry. And they find out that the reason that he done this was because of what his father-in-law had done. So the story goes on that the Philistines go to the father-in-law's house. They take the father-in-law and Samson's, I guess you'd say, previous wife at this point, and they execute them. They're put to death in retaliation for the destruction of those grain, olive, and vineyards. So Samson responds again by killing a multitude of Philistines, it tells us. And that Hebrew word for multitude simply means a large number. So we don't know exactly how many people lost their lives in that moment. Now you're already probably thinking, wow, this escalated quickly, right? And that's true, it has. So again, I ask you the question, do forgiveness and retribution go together? Is it possible for them to go hand in hand? Now, in response to killing a large number of the Philistines gather their army and march against the tribe of Dan, which Samson was a part of. And to do this, they would have had to camp in the territory of Judah, which neighbored Dan. So the men of Judah march up against the Philistines and they say, "What are you doing?" Now understand, the Philistines were in power and oppressed Israel at this time. But that didn't mean there could still not be skirmishes. There would still be resistance. There would still be battles that would rage on within the territories. And the Philistines' response to Judah's men was, we are here for Samson because of what he did to us. Do you see the back and forth? So Judah's men say, we'll go find him. We'll bring him to you. And they find him hiding in a cave. And then when they get to him, they say, we got to take you to the Philistines. We don't have a choice. And so Samson makes a deal with him. He says, hey, as long as you don't kill me, I'll let you arrest me and take me to the Philistines. That's fine. I'm good with that. So they honor the deal. They take him to the Philistines. In ropes of bondage. He's tied up. And somewhere in custody, somewhere down the line of probably being taken back to the land of the Philistines, he breaks free of his bondage ropes. And lo and behold, on the ground, somewhere within the vicinity of where he was, he may have chose this moment when he saw what was lying there, was the skeletal bone, jawbone of a donkey. Donkeys were popular to be out in the wilderness in these regions. They actually thrived in these environments. Their donkeys do. Still to this day they do. And they use them for a multitude of reasons. So right there was the skeletal jawbone of a donkey. And with that jawbone, he kills 1,000 of the Philistines. Now that number in Hebrew, 1,000, means something. Because if you're thinking, wow, 1,000 people, that is insane at this point. 1,000 can actually mean to the Hebrew, or to the Jew, it represents vastness or infinity. But the killing was non-stop. So the story that started with a man and his wife, it started with a man and his wife, then a competition of a riddle, then became part of an important food source, destruction of property, then people died, then more people died, then armies got involved, then more people died. See the escalation? Do forgiveness and retribution go hand in hand? This sounds oddly familiar with the eye for an eye mentality. It never stops. Because the cycle of revenge has no end unless someone is willing to put an end to it. In a way, the story of Samson is about forgiveness. Because at this point in the story, one could even say that someone needs to drop the jawbone of vengeance. The first step of forgiveness in our lives is to simply be the one who stops the cycle and drops the jawbone. Be the person who steps back and says, no more. No more payback. No more they deserved it. No more they did to me, they just did this to me, so I'm going to do back to them what's due. No more of that. Don't be that person. Or be that person, I'm sorry. Because if you are that person, you are the one that actually will begin the process of healing between you and that other person or that other party. Because the cycle of vengeance has to stop somewhere. Because if not, it always leads to a destructive end. Always. Retribution will know no end until somebody is willing to forgive. And I'm not. Samson had his strengths. No pun intended. But he had a lot of weaknesses too. So did most of the judges that we read about. What about Gideon? He's one of the heroes of our Old Testament, right? And yet that guy had an anger problem. He eventually would build an idol and lead people to sin. Where did that come from? But yet he did great things, didn't he? So don't take it that I'm trying to beat up Samson, because I don't think I could do that physically. And I'm not trying to do that verbally in this lesson either. But I am simply trying to say that Christ-like biblical forgiveness cannot include retaliation from man. It doesn't go together. And through our Christian lens, we sometimes hear that it does. And it doesn't. The story of Samson shows that. We can't just keep going back and forth because of what somebody did to us or what somebody said about us. It doesn't work. But I think there's more to forgiveness than just saying, I forgive. I think there's a second step. And that's making the choice to stop making that other person carry the burden anymore either. And that's why I said open up a can of worms, because sometimes when we preach forgiveness, we say, well, I forgave it, the rest is on them. That's not a good attitude to have either. You can't simply just drop the jawbone and that be the end of it. You have to decide that when you see that other person, whether it be in person, whether it be in your mind, that you aren't going to let that dark cloud of bitterness follow you every time you see them. And that's the hard part about forgiveness. You have to, with God's strength and His guidance and His assistance, chase those dark clouds away and allow that other person to also come into the light. Because that light, it's not about your freedom. It's not about their freedom entirely. It's about yours. Because ever since the day you dropped the jawbone of vengeance, the dark cloud does nothing to that other person. Nothing. But it takes a toll on you. It simply builds up in your heart and takes root. And like a cancer will spread and fester at your soul. Jesus tells an interesting parable in Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35. It's the parable about the king settling an account with one of his servants. And in that story, he brings forth a servant that owed him a lifetime or more worth of salary. Gobs of money. He calls the man in and demands repayment. But the man falls at the king's feet and he begs for mercy, for forgiveness. Just give me time, he says. He doesn't ask to erase the debt. He just says, give me time. There wasn't enough time. He didn't have the physical years on earth to pay it back. And in an amazing and merciful move, the king in that parable not only forgives the man of his debt, but the scripture says that he wipes that slate clean. Then that man does the unthinkable. He goes out and he finds one of his fellow servants, and that fellow servant owed 3 months worth of debt. And that escalates to the point that he goes into violent mode and starts to choke the man, demanding immediate repayment. Total different reaction than what he had just been given or moved. Jesus closes the story out by saying that we are to be like that king. We are to forgive each other in that fashion. You see, the king was willing to stop and drop the jawbone. But I ask you the question, what happened to the debt that that man owed? And if your answer is, it went away, wrong answer. Because that debt went somewhere. The king had to absorb the debt. The king had to take the loss. And that is one of the hardest truths of forgiveness. The king wasn't willing to let the king is not willing to let the debt follow the man around for the rest of his days. But the loss was still there. And a lifetime's worth of salary, that's a lot of money. He lost out on what was originally owed to him. I want to share a quote. I didn't put it up here, so just listen closely. From Timothy Keller in his book, The Reason for God. Forgiveness means refusing to make them pay for what they did. However, to refrain from lashing out at someone when you want to do so with all your being is agony. It is a form of suffering. You not only suffer the original loss of happiness, reputation, and opportunity, but now you forego the consolation of inflicting the same on them. You are absorbing the debt. You are taking the cost of it completely on yourself instead of taking it out or collecting on the other person. It hurts terribly, and many people would say it feels like a kind of death. Yes, but it is a death that leads to a resurrection instead of a lifelong living death of bitterness and cynicism. No one just forgives if the evil is serious. Everyone who forgives great evil goes through a death into resurrection and experiences the nails, blood, sweat, and tears. And everyone who forgives someone bears the other's sins. Forgiveness is always a form of costly suffering. Now, I will say that forgiveness is not admitting what they did didn't matter. That's not what I'm saying. Or what they did, you're never going to forget. Or you will forget, I'm sorry. Forgiveness is not saying that there won't be consequences for what happened. It's also not ignoring the fact that some people are very destructive and live on destructive behaviors. It's not saying that someone is not going to have to answer to the law for what they did. And it's not calling good what God has called evil. Forgiveness is letting the jawbone hit the floor. It is about refusing to let the bitterness take root and grow in your heart. And it's deciding that you are going to absorb and shoulder the debt and the pain and the debt that was owed to you. This is Christ-like forgiveness all the way. Because isn't that what he did for us? I want to encourage you this morning that if you are in a Samson boat, or in the boat with Samson in the story, and the battle is constantly raging, and there is a back and forth of retribution that you have with somebody or a group of people. Look at what it did with Samson. Look at what it did to him. The anger, the bitterness, the rage, it continued to grow and grow and grow. And to his extremity, people died. Now, I'm not saying that's your particular situation at all. I don't think there are 1,000 Philistines that you're taking out. That's not the point. But maybe there's a relationship. Maybe there's a connection that's not there or is kind of broken away because of the refusal to forgive. Could be more than one. And this forgiveness isn't always easy as we preach it. Because sometimes the lessons that I have heard and seen, it doesn't go into this type of extent. But this is the truth of forgiveness. It's not easy. I don't think it's meant to be easy. It's hard. True forgiveness is hard. And this probably wasn't the lesson of Samson you were expecting. Totally not even close to what you were expecting, I'm sure. We hear lessons all the time on these judges of Israel from the book. And with Samson, you always hear about the cool things he did. But none of these judges were perfect. And I think that makes a very good point that God works through our weaknesses and He works through broken people. Just like He did with Samson. God never left Samson. The truth is, He never left him. Even when he was finally given over to the Philistines, he was physically blinded. They gouged his eyes out. But God never left him. And He was with him to the very end when his life ended. Being honest on this, sometimes we overlook the nitty-gritty details of our famous Bible characters. But there are lessons to be learned on their weaknesses and their strengths. Jesus has absorbed our debts. He has absorbed the debts that we owe. He took those to the cross. And He was resurrected, defeating sin and death. And we have salvation in Him, and He's waiting for you. It's already there. What are you waiting for? You may be here this morning, and you may have you may be having forgiveness trouble. You may be in this battling war, this revenge cycle, trying to get back at someone for what they did to you or what they said about you. Or maybe you're holding on to that dark cloud of bitterness, and it's starting to take root, or it already has. Because you're looking at that other person and you're saying, well, they never faced consequences for what they did. They never paid for what they did. Or you may think they're living a pretty good life compared to yours. Don't do that. Don't compare yourself. That's one of the biggest dangers, comparing yourself to other people. That's a dangerous move. Don't allow that bitterness to take over your soul. And if there's a need on your heart today that you feel is better, if you don't want to bring it up, or you don't want to make that approach this morning, and you want to bring this up in private, I mean, you can, Ivan, Dale, Seth, me, you can talk to us if you'd like to. We'll try to help in any way that we can. But we would love to assist and help you as together we stand and as we sing.